Welcome to Scotland This Week. This is David Griffiths welcoming you to an enthralling story of politics in Scotland. What a week it has been! Why am I living in this crazy country? It's because I love it. I want to save it from the nonsense the SNP have given us covering in this show. What we are going to cover in this show, I'm trying to say, is over the last week, there has been big issues over the SNP's finances. We'll be dealing with that. And news recently in that SNP auditors resigned a few months ago. Also, we'll be touching for a little while on the motorhome. How the SNP leader should not know he's got a blooming big expensive motorhome, I do not know. It's just, I mean, my head's going. It really, I can't believe that we in Scotland have got such a crazy government. And that's leaving aside legal matters, which we're not going to cover, I know, because it could well be an open case with the moral Sturgeon household having a big tent outside their house, the big police inquiry. We'll let the police get on with that, the courts get on with that. But what we can talk about is the craziness of Scottish government. We will be covering the gender recognition bill, listening to what David Curtin, Heritage Party UK leader, had to say on GB News last Christmas when all this news was breaking. Also, more recent news from GB News in relation to the Gender Recognition Act, because apparently Hunter Useless, as Dan Wootton calls him, as I call him, is looking to challenge the government, the UK government, in court over it. Well, this act is so mad, because if it did go through, you could be a woman in Scotland and a man in England. That's what Section 35 is all about, to stop such nonsense. And as if Hunter hasn't got enough trouble that he wanting to take the UK government to court over this matter. Let's have a sensible government. I tell you this, look, we're just wee souls in the southwest Scotland. We got less than 100 members. But what I do know is David beat Goliath, and we're going to take on the Goliath and beat them. Join us in the Scottish Heritage Party. You'd be so welcome. If only we had the publicity, if only we could really get this message across. I'm determined to do it, because we've got to fight for our country. Scotland is a nation, but Holyrood is a disaster. But we're a nation within nations, the United Kingdom. And we need to stand together and be equal in the United Kingdom. I'm not looking for Scotland to be under the English or anybody else. But the SNP is not looking for independence. It's looking for globalism. They're not the SNP, it's all Scottish National Party. They're the Scottish SGP, Globalist Party. That's not independence. What I want to see is a free Scotland within a free UK of Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland and England all being equal with the same laws, with all that we stand for, our history, our heritage, all same. You know, the Scots have fought for Great Britain on the front line for decades. The Scots are a fighting nation. I don't want to wave two fingers to the past as the SNP are doing. The Scottish regiments are proud regiments fighting for the whole of the UK. And that needs to continue. But we've got a crazy government. I am screaming from here in southwest Scotland Come alive, Scotland. Join the Scottish Heritage Party so we can give the power back to the people. Close Holyrood. Restore the county boundaries. Very, very important, as they originally were. Let's get rid of Police Scotland and have county constabularies like we used to have, all working together like we used to do. And let's have local councillors overseeing what's going on and sending MPs to Westminster, and have a Westminster which means something for Scotland, rather than have crazy SNP and even Albert MPs, even though they are a bit more sensible. Let us have proper representation in Westminster. Because the Scots have done brilliant in the past in Westminster. Let us look to restore our heritage. Now, before we get on to the gender recognition bill, let's look at some other items of Scottish news. Since the SNP took over the ferries, it's been a disaster. And Calmac, there's a picture you can see there. Lovely looking ferry going to the Isle of Arran. That's a boat which was built in 1983, which is living past its time, and it has been issued by Calmac information in relation to their major vessels. The MV Isle of Arran, which sails from the Ayrshire coast, not far from here, to Arran, obviously, built 1983, age 40, well beyond its expected operational life. Then we've got the Hebridean Isles, 1985, age 38, the Isle of Mull, age 36, Lord of the Isles, age 34. I remember as a child going on reliable ferries to the islands from the Scottish mainland. What has happened? I tell you what has happened. Disaster to island communities, as they can't rely on the ferries anymore. I've got 2 ferry stories this week. No doubt other weeks we'll get more. The report which I'm reading says that the MV Isle of Arran is the oldest in Calmac's fleet. It sails on Calmac's busiest route. They were cancelled on Thursday afternoon as a leak of gases from a vessel's exhaust spilled into the engine room. The only ferry serving the route between Ardrossan and Broddock, the MV Isle of Arran, was out of action while the problem was fixed. Sailings are due to resume with the 7 o'clock service from Ardrossan on Friday. That's the day. The vessel's been standing in for the MV Caledonian Isles, which has been in dry dock since January. The MV Glen Sannox, which is being built at the nationalised Ferguson shipyard, was due to be completed in 2018 and is expected to be ready this autumn, 18, 19, 21 to 23. The SNP shipyard, 5 years late with an order. How much longer are we going to suffer all this? And if that's not bad enough, think of the people near Fort William in the Highlands. Highland Regional Council run a ferry, or should I say, have run a ferry, which is called the Corran Ferry. The MV Corran is the main vessel on the Highland Council run service. Now, where is this? I've got my notes here. We can show you a little picture. I know this area well. I worked around this area for many years. Now, if you see here, can the camera pick it up? Yeah. Where it is? There it is. Right. That is the, where are it? Let me have a look at it. Yes. That is Loch Eel at the top. There is Fort William, forgive me. There is Fort William over here. There's Corran, there's Ardgour, and that takes you to Ardnamurchan. along Loch Sunat. And down here, there's another ferry which goes, a Calmac ferry, which goes to the Isle of Mull. Now, that little stretch of water there has been served for years by a ferry. But now cars have got to go all the way up here, all the way around Lockyer and all the way down to here. Miles and miles and miles. And businesses are suffering. A lady called Joanne Matheson says local people are livid about the ferry disruption. Mrs. Matheson agreed priority should be given to local people need to travel for work and school. But we need to deal with this traffic issue, and local businesses which rely on the ferry are seriously suffering and could go out of work. Now, I remember the history of Highland Regional Council ferries. They had a ferry at Kyle and they had a ferry at Keswick, and they have had this ferry for some years. Kyleskew's now got a bridge, Keswick's now got a bridge, but Corran's not got a bridge. And I remember them transferring the ferries from Keswick and from Kyleskew down to Corran near Fort William to operate. But now they've got two ferries, one the Maid of Glencoe, which used to run years and years ago. I remember being honest at the Kyleskew ferry. That has been the backup to a vessel called the MV Corran, which crosses this narrow piece of water. Well, let me tell you this, both vessels are now not working. Scotland relies on its ferries. It is so important to have reliable ferries. It is a massive, massive importance. The humps are useless. He was transport secretary. The trains weren't running. Now he's first minister. The ferries ain't running. It's a disaster. Look, we will give the power back to the people. Vote and join the Scottish Heritage Party. We've got to bring sanity to Scotland. Scotland's a great nation within the UK and can be again. We need to fight for Scotland and have a government which is sensible. Then further news. There is a First World War prisoner of war camp, which I'm pleased to say has been recognized being of national importance. Can you see the picture there? These are original huts from World War I. Wouldn't it be great to develop this as a major tourist attraction in the borders? Like in Yorkshire, there's Eden Camp, and tell of the military history and heritage of Scotland, its prisoner of war camps. Let's look to invest in that. We've got to build up the tourist trade. At the same time, look to bring understanding of our heritage to our children. This is so, so important. There is a copy, by the way, of the motorhome of the SNP, which was going to be used as a battle bus, we understand. A mobile campaign room is the excuse to the Daily Record. I can't believe how this wasn't known within the cabinet of the SNP, the ownership of a luxury motorhome. But that's what Humsa has said. And before we get on to the gender recognition bill and try and bring understanding of it, I want to deal with an even more important issue in Scotland. An Archbishop Cordileone has condemned abortion as being satanic worship and LGBT ideology as demonic. Now let's just deal with that. Abortion is the killing of a human being in the womb. We in the Scottish Heritage Party will immediately ban it and make it a serious offence. In my view, it's first-degree murder. It needs to be addressed, because unless we can remove death from the agenda of our government, we as a nation will surely die. Said the Archbishop, abortion is part of satanic worship. He made the comments during a recent spiritual warfare conference. He related this as being the worship of the false god Moloch, similar to the worship of abortion today. He said pagan worship is in a certain sense a new kind reviving now, and it is part of satanic worship, the abortion and sacrificing of children. I can entirely agree with the Archbishop. Let me explain. Christianity is built on the shedding of blood, the shedding of Christ's blood. No other blood but the blood of Jesus. And as every pagan knows, to get in the spirit, and many people into paganism sacrifice on the hills chickens and so forth. But the highest level of sacrifice in paganism is in human sacrifice. And this is happening worldwide with the global agenda, in my view. That these crazy globalist laws are coming in on the back of the abortion of children. Human sacrifice, in my view, to Moloch. I believe we don't need a Scottish globalist party, but we need a party which will give the power back to the people and protect the people from conception to the grave. And I believe we are dealing with a party in Scotland who has closed us down for the last 2 to 3 years, has killed child after child. Such is the importance of changing tack and coming to a party which will uphold Scottish heritage. This we shall do with every passion, every bone in our body being used to bring understanding of the evil of abortion. And we appreciate the Roman Catholic Archbishop bringing this out into the open. And whether we be Protestants, as I am, or Roman Catholic, or Muslim, we can agree on certain ethical things. There are doctrinal differences between us, but this should never stop us loving our neighbor as ourselves. This should never stop us being prepared to give our lives for others, of whatever background they may be. But I believe what we're dealing with in Scotland is an LGBTQ agenda which has gone wild. And I believe many homosexuals agree with me. It is absolutely crazy, this gender recognition bill. And so it is interesting that last Christmas, David Curtin, UK Heritage Party leader, was on GB News. You'll see the Christmas trees, talking about this very crazy issue. So let's just go back in time to last Christmas and David Curtin on GB News.
Kick things off with something that has been puzzling and enraging me in equal measure. Just as I said, we've been reporting all week from Scotland, where Nicola Sturgeon's SNP has passed a hugely controversial bill, to say the least. The bill will allow men, women and teenagers as young as 16 to self-identify as the opposite gender without any need for a medical diagnosis. Now there's talk, though, that the UK government could step in and block the legislation. The Prime Minister has said that the government is taking a close look at the bill, and the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Jack, has issued a statement raising the possibility that he could invoke powers to block the bill from going for royal assent and essentially take the Scottish government to court. David, should we be calling on the government to block this bill?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an insane bill, and not many people in Scotland actually want it. It seems that the Scottish Parliament has been taken over by a group of cultural Marxists who are in hock to some very, very aggressive trans activists, which are small in number, and they want to impose their will on the rest of society and just completely change what are societal norms. Look, there are two sexes, male and female, and your sex is determined, your biological sex is determined by your anatomy and by your chromosomes. But over the last 50 or 60 years, people have developed this concept of gender that was introduced by some really crazy academics in the 1950s. And this idea has been mainstreamed, that there's something called gender that is different to biological sex. So there's not two genders, there's 100 different genders, but you can change your gender whenever you want. And now you've got the Scottish Parliament saying, well, whenever you decide, even if you're, 16 or over, you can say that you're male if you're actually female, or female if you're actually male. The whole thing doesn't make any sense to anyone with a sound mind. So if the government in Westminster can overturn this, good for them. They should do it.
Do you think that sex and gender are two different things, Paul?
Well, I mean, I
Bit of a controversial question.
It is a controversial question. I mean, sex for me is immutable, biological sex. I mean, when, as you said in the introduction, people, in order to obtain a gender recognition certificate, are told they have to live within that gender for a certain amount of time. Well, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to say, in order to prove that you're a woman, you have to live as a woman for 3 months or whatever?
Does it mean wear a dress and lipstick?
This is the thing. Do you wear pink? Do you wear your hair in plaits? Do you play with dolls? I mean, surely the whole point of breaking down those gender stereotypes is that women and girls weren't categorised in that way and could actually move into occupations, industries, hobbies, pastimes that once upon a time were denied to them because they were told, well, no, these things are for boys and men. And my fear really, Emily, is women's struggle over recent decades where women have genuinely fought for equality, they've fought for privacy, they've fought for security in public spaces, in the workplace and so on, is in danger, I think, of being unpicked. All of those advancements that women won are in danger of now unravelling as a result of what I see as a barking mad piece of legislation, which ultimately, as David said, renders the whole concept of womanhood effectively meaningless.
Well, that's what
it does.
That's what pains me the most out of all of this, not just the safety concerns or the privacy concerns, as you mentioned, is just fundamentally diluting what it means to be a woman. If you are legally a woman because you have essentially worn a dress for 3 months or whatever else that shows you are female in gender, suddenly, according to the law, you are a woman
and
on
why,
equal footing with a woman in many, many ways. That just seems absolutely absurd. But some people liken this whole thing to the campaign for gay rights. Do you think those two are comparable?
No, I think it's an insult to gay people, actually, who fought for liberation, who fought for equality for so long, to say that actually this is exactly the same thing. It's clearly not the same thing at all. I think there are clearly here... First of all, as I said, it renders a concept of womanhood meaningless. But also, as a husband and a father, the idea that I would want my daughter to be in a public space, in a changing room, for example, and somebody who is clearly still a biological male but decides on a particular day to declare himself to be a woman and therefore thinks that he has the right to access those spaces. I mean, I think any ordinary husband and father is going to be concerned about that, about the impact on women's safety and security.
Well, I mean, thank goodness for people like J.K. Rowling and Helen Joyce and people who have stood up against what I think, and I think we can all agree, is total madness. But coming back to the issue of Nicola Sturgeon and what butting in from Westminster might do, how do you think that would go down in Scotland?
Well, she would play it politically and she would say, well, this is England, Westminster interfering with Scotland, therefore there's a case for Scottish independence. But I think we've got to look at this issue separately. This is nothing to do with Scottish independence. This is about the fundamental reality and nature of humanity and what we are as men and women. And this is more important than, worrying about what Nicola Sturgeon might say about Scottish independence. If we have the power to use to stop this, and I think maybe we need to save Scotland at this point.
Well, I think a lot of Scots would be happy.
Yeah.
May I just... We're getting some very interesting emails in from you at home, so I'm just going to read out a couple and we can react to those. Gareth in Bridgend says, I suspect Sturgeon has rushed this bill through knowing Westminster would react negatively. This gives Sturgeon the perfect launch pad to tell Scots, how dare they? We need independence to make our own decisions. I'd agree with you, Gareth, if it weren't for the fact that most Scots don't seem to support this bill.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, there's a danger here that Nicola Sturgeon, in her rush to prove herself to be, you know, the most radically progressive leader in Scotland, and the SNP, the most radically progressive party, have overplayed their hand to some degree, because I can't imagine that people in Scotland are actually that much different to people in England. No. I suspect a lot of people in Scotland are probably looking at this kind of stuff, mainstream voters in Scotland, and thinking, hold on a second, this does not resonate with me. I've got real concerns about this. Because it seems to me to have been a fringe issue for some years now. It seems to have been a very vocal but well-organised minority.
Very well-organised.
Who are, you know, claiming prejudice, claiming discrimination, and actually the argument that trans people are some of the most discriminated against in our society is fundamentally not true, actually. When you look at the stats, it's not actually true.
People talk about how hate crimes against transgender people have risen.
But that's explained by improved kind of reporting methods and more social awareness and things like that. And there are no, actually, when you think about it, there are no rights that trans people don't have that other people have. So we need to kind of get this in perspective. And I'm not sure, actually, how we say that other forms of cultural appropriation are unacceptable. But when it comes to women, we say, no, it's absolutely fine to don a dress and to wear high heels and to wake up one morning and to say, I'm a woman and I know what it's like to be a woman. But when we talk about blackface, for example, people say that's completely unacceptable. Why do we make an exemption for women? Why do we say that it's so meaningless that anybody can just become a woman?
Well, it's just totally playing into stereotypes, isn't it? Which is what feminists wanted to change. Now, very interestingly, Judith, a Scottish woman, she says, as a Scottish woman, Sunak must stop this bill. Marion says, please, GB News, can you stand up for the rights of women, children and parents and put pressure on Suella Braverman and the British government to end this transgender law without any safety amendments? So, there's a Scottish woman.
Absolutely. I mean, well, these people, Suella Braverman particularly, says she wants to stand up against wokery. I actually was at a speech in 2019 at the Bruges Group where she actually mentioned cultural Marxism for the first time. Suella Braverman said that in a speech. She's said for many, many years she wants to fight this and stand up for it. Well, this is your time, Suella Braverman. This is your time, Rishi Sunak. I mean...
To be fair to Suella, she's got a lot on her plate.
Yeah, true, but, I mean, well, whoever's got to make the decision...
I think Kemi Badenoch has already spoken out.
This is a party, the Conservative Party in Westminster, that has been so non-conservative, so anti-conservative, really, I think, for most of the 12 years it's been in power since the 2010 elections. But they always... protest that they are actually really genuine conservatives. This is a chance to actually do something that is really conservative.
Well, there you go. You heard it from David.
I have to say, I've got no faith in the Conservative Party. I mean, we hear noises off sometimes. We hear the likes of Suella Braverman stand up against it. But actually, you know, in terms of the kind of wokery that we're seeing embedded within our society now, when was it introduced? It was introduced during a Conservative government. I mean, the Tories have been in power for the last 12 years or whatever it is, and actually that kind of hyper-progressive agenda has seeped deeper and deeper into our society, and they've been in charge. So you know, they haven't pushed back against it, as far as I can see. Whenever they're called upon to challenge some of the more radical things that are implemented in our society, they never really do so.
To be fair, though, in Scotland, Labour have been totally 100% complicit, by the sounds of it, with this bill going through. They don't seem to have standed up. I've seen the likes of J.K. Rowling pleading with the Labour Party to actually stand up against this bill, because there aren't enough Conservatives up in Scotland to do so, as we've seen.
Part of that, Emily, is because, look, the truth is we have got a generation of politicians these days who are absolutely petrified of saying no to a vocal minority who are claiming prejudice and discrimination. And sometimes you do have to say it, particularly in a case like this, where the rights that are being demanded are likely to impact in a negative way on the rights of other groups of people. You have to say, on this occasion, do you know what? You're wrong. We're not going to accept it. We're not going to do what you want. But because we've got politicians who are petrified of being called nasty names on Twitter, they haven't got the backbone to do it. That's the truth of it.
Well, it's quite interesting what Adrian here said to David in Sheffield. He says, the Scots need to know the power is in their hands. If they agree with the woke insanity, vote SNP. If they don't, then find an alternative candidate. So essentially, I think what he's saying is that SNP have proven themselves that they are insane in this respect, in Adrian's words, and therefore that might force a change of government. So perhaps it's a good thing.
I hope so. Unfortunately, the last Scottish elections were, I think, 2021, isn't it? So there's not going to be any more
That's true, yes.
elections in the Scottish Parliament until 2026. So they've got a long time to wait. I mean, so actually with this, it's really got to be the case that the Westminster government intervenes now, because there isn't a chance to vote them out for another 4 years. And when that happens, I hope, well, there'll be new parties standing. We will be standing in Scotland and making a change.
Quick word from you before we go to some more social.
The Westminster government may have no option but to intervene, because if it can be demonstrated that this law in Scotland clearly does contradict laws, UK-wide laws, in terms of the Equality Act 2010, for example, they will have to intervene. Their hand will be forced on it.
Well, to give some balance from the other point of view is that many people who have campaigned for this change would argue that the Equality Act protects women, even with this legislation, insofar as places are allowed to still be divided in terms of sex. So you can still have prisons that are based on sex, not gender, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that so many institutions are indoctrinated with this ideology that they don't wish to be sex-based anymore, as we saw with what happened when J.K. Rowling said that she was opening up a women-only refuge for only biological women. She got a lot of heat for that. Jeff has said the reason she and her misguided following have pushed this legislation through is so that she can claim interference from the UK government when they stop it. I think that's a good point, but of course the Scots don't support it either, at least the majority don't. Gary says it's obvious that Sturgeon has purposefully chosen a bill that Westminster is likely to overturn. Again, she can then claim that Scotland is unable to pass its own laws and therefore engineer support for another referendum. I mean, it's a compelling argument, but I'm not sure in the case of this bill, because this is a deeply controversial and disliked bill. Janine says, would you be happy if your wife or daughter, whilst in a women-only changing room shower, was confronted by a naked biological man asserting that he was a woman? No, I don't think I would be happy. I don't have a daughter yet, but I certainly wouldn't be happy. I think a lot of men are worried for their daughters, actually.
Yeah, and they have every right to be. And, you know, I do wonder how many of these MSPs who voted the legislation through do have young daughters. I suspect not many of them do, because if they did have, I think they would have probably thought about it a little bit harder.
I think ideology just blinds people.
Maybe, and as I said, you know, cowardice in terms of being called nasty names. But I think it's an entirely legitimate thing to say, look, as the father of a child, a female daughter, I do not want my daughter to be compelled to share what, in my view, should be a single-sex space for women with biological men, regardless of however they identify. It shouldn't happen, and I would stand against it, and I think most fathers would in this country.
I want to kick things off.
Now, this was last Christmas. Forgive me there, just put my mic fader up. This was last Christmas. Things have developed since then, of course. We've had the coming down of Nicola Sturgeon. Now, let me deal with that issue. I believe it is over this gender recognition bill that the coming down of Nicola Sturgeon occurred. Now, I understand the other argument, and I sympathise with it, that the issues around the finances of the SNP, the way it's been running government, the way it's been running its own party, is the main reason why we saw the downfall of Nicola Sturgeon. But I think it's far more deeper than this, that what we found is that we are living in a society which has been infiltrated by extreme what's called wokeism, as David Curtin brought out in the GB News interview. And that wokery has gone to such an extreme that it's affecting the rights of women, bringing the conditions for the bringing down the United Kingdom, that a man can be a man in England, yet as soon as he crosses the border into Scotland, he can then choose to be a woman. There are certain laws that need to coordinate across the UK. Hence, Alistair Jack, who is the MP here in Dumfries and Galloway, Secretary of State for Scotland, made his stand over what's called a Section 35, and saying that this law cannot go through. Now, there were certain repercussions in Scotland over a certain gentleman who had raped as a man, I think it was 2 women, and seriously raped them. And that he chose to go to a women's prison on the basis that this male rapist suddenly, who has raped women, suddenly then decided to become a woman himself. I believe it is that brought Nicola Sturgeon down and will bring down Humza Useless. I think his actions in using taxpayers' money to take the UK government to court over this issue is an outrage and needs to be stopped. It is a waste of resources. Now, what they do in the SNP with their own resources for members' subscriptions is what is between the members and the SNP. Well, it seems it's also now to do with the police, because there's an inquiry in relation to corruption. We make no comment about that. That's all it seems to be. But when it comes to the Scottish taxpayer and his or her money, and the British taxpayer as a whole, which subsidises Scotland, and the obscene waste of money when it comes to what is a useless case, by, in my view, a useless First Minister, is completely and absolutely outrageous. Now, let's go to GB News, a more recent edition than the one from last Christmas. This one lasts just 5 minutes. The heading on the screen there is Coronation's Quarrels, but I believe it goes on to dealing with this Scottish issue as well. So over to GB News.
The Scottish Government under new leader Humza Yousaf will challenge the UK Government's use of Section 35 of the Scotland Act.
Now, this is about the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Jack, using it to stop that gender recognition reform bill, which effectively allows children as young as 15 and a half to start the process of changing their gender without consulting even doctors.
I'm struggling with this story as well this morning. It's one of those days. Right, let's get the latest from former SNP member Stuart Crawford. Good morning, Stuart. Thank you for joining us this morning. So what exactly is happening? Can you just explain what is happening with this Section 35, what Section 35 actually even is, and what it means for Scotland?
Good morning. Well, let me start by saying that such are the political developments in Scotland over the past few weeks and months. It's very difficult to keep up. Because every day brings a new problem for the SNP and the Scottish Government. But basically, Section 35 is contained in the Scotland Act 1998, which set up the parameters of the Scottish Parliament, and is the clause that allows Westminster to intervene if any legislation passed by the Scottish Parliament appears to contradict current UK legislation. And nobody objected to it when the Scotland Act was passed in 1998, and it's now been invoked by Alistair Jack to prevent the measures introduced and passed by the Scottish Parliament, which you've just spoken about, being implemented by preventing them getting royal assent. And the reason for that is that the Scottish Parliament has passed in the GRR bill a legislation which he and Westminster argue contradicts and contravenes the Equality Act, which applies to the whole of the UK. And that's basically what the battle's all about.
This is Humza Yousaf, isn't it, Stuart, following the agenda of his predecessor as continuity candidate to Nicola Sturgeon. And it was, in my view, a major factor in her fall from power.
Yes, it's interesting that the SNP may well bring itself down, not by its independence agenda, which obviously it has pursued with some vigour over the years, but by a peripheral issue, which is the GRR bill. Humza Yousaf is indeed been called the continuity candidate and appears to have all the hallmarks of someone who's not playing to his own agenda. It's almost as if someone else is still pulling the strings. Yeah. But the GRR bill is deeply unpopular with the Scottish population, the Scottish electorate as a whole, and quite why he's continuing down this path almost beggars belief. I think it's more to do with confrontation with Westminster than it is to do with anything else.
Is it also a way of distracting from the huge financial problems the SNP have got? The police investigation, Peter Murrow, who was the chief executive, arrested and interviewed by the police. We still don't know where the £600,000 was spent, why he gave the secret loan to the SNP. Perhaps he's trying to distract from that.
Well, yes, I mean, all of the above. The SNP is in some turmoil, I think one could put it euphemistically, over all those issues. And in many ways, if you look through history, when a state is in turmoil, the leader of that state will invent a foreign war to bring the country together again. You could see this move by Humza Yousaf as being in that sort of context. Suffice to say, though, at this point, although we think it's highly unlikely that the challenge to the Section 35 order, which eventually will end up in the Supreme Court, will succeed. We don't know for sure, but it's a process that's going to take, well, it's certainly the rest of this year and possibly a big chunk of next before it's resolved.
I just find it astonishing that of all the battles he chooses to fight, he chooses this one. When there are as we all know, there are so many problems in Scotland.
And Stuart, he did manage to absent himself from the vote on this legislation because there are suggestions he did not want to offend his followers in his own Muslim faith.
Yes, indeed. That one of the great sort of contradictions of the SNP leadership race was that Kate Forbes was taken to task for her religious beliefs and her faith, and the fact that she said she would not have voted for the GRR bill had she been in Parliament. And yet it's quite clear that Humza Yousaf used an excuse with a meeting with one of the consulates in Glasgow to get out of the vote so that he would not upset his particular faith. So there's lots of contradictions and lots of humbug and hypocrisy going on up here, but it changes from day to day. Who knows what tomorrow will bring?
Well, Stuart, you'll be able to tell us it. That's Stuart Crawford, leading figure in the SNP. Thanks.
Interesting comments there by Andrew Pearce in relation to Humza and his own Muslim faith and trying to draw a balance between continuing his wokery and being a practicing Muslim. The two don't go together, in my view. And that we have a party deeply divided and deeply attacking women. Now, from my understanding, Andrew Pearce is an acknowledged homosexual. And I've known highly intelligent homosexuals. One particular homosexual helped us legally on one occasion in our church ministry. And we so appreciate his work and his care and his concern. So if anything comes back at me about being abusive to homosexuals and so, look, it's just not true. There are many homosexuals against this gender recognition bill. And this is the reality of it. It is a useless bill, and it's extremely dangerous in two main counts, in my view. One, the breakup of the United Kingdom and its legal processes, in that there isn't a consistency in relation to the status of a man and a woman from one part of the United Kingdom to the other. And the second one, perhaps the most important one, in fact, I would say the most important one, the relationship between this and the safety of women, particularly within the context of the pulling down of Nicola Sturgeon in relation to a man who had raped women. That is a serious abuse. Convicted rapist then declared himself to be a woman could go to a women's prison and be a danger to what could well be highly vulnerable women in prison. I believe we're dealing with an outrageous government in Scotland who can't even look after their own affairs. Never mind anything else. And this point over management of their own affairs recently came up on GB News as well. So let's have a look at what GB News has to say about this.
Well, stay with politics. North of the border, reports in a Scotsman newspaper that Scotland's new First Minister and leader of the SNP has said that the party's auditors actually quit in October of last year and that the SNP is yet to appoint a replacement despite the accounts being due on July the 7th. Well, Humza Yousaf telling journalists that their decade-long working relationship with that particular firm of accountants coming to an end 6 months ago, admitting this was problematic for the party. Let's get more now with our political reporter, Catherine Forster, joining us at Westminster. And Catherine, of course, we were breaking this news about the accountants last week, but clearly the relationship had broken down a lot earlier than that.
Yes, the plot thickens, doesn't it? It was just at the end of last week that the news broke that Johnston Carmichael, who have done the SNP's accounts for a decade, had resigned. Now, the SNP must file accounts by the 7th of July, and it was understood that they had resigned before the former chief executive of the SNP, Peter Murrell, was arrested by police last Wednesday. He, of course, was questioned for several hours and later released without charge. But now Humza Yousaf, the new First Minister, has told reporters that, in fact, the company resigned last year, so potentially 6 months ago. He said he thought it was round about October. And in all of that time, they haven't managed to find another firm to do their books, which obviously raises very, very many questions. Now, Scottish Labour Deputy Leader Jackie Baillie has said that this stinks to high heaven. And Humza Yousaf himself has said that, yes, he said, it's problematic. I don't deny that at all. That really is putting it rather mildly, isn't it? Because, of course, there is this ongoing police investigation been going on now for over 18 months into £600,000 worth of donations made by SNP members to fund a new referendum into independence. Now, where that money has gone remains unclear, but many questions being asked, certainly a huge lack of transparency about what has been going on at the top of the party. And of course, for many, many years, the SNP pretty much reigned supreme in Scotland, not far off a one-party state, and they just did what they did, and not many questions were asked. But with the resignation of Nicola Sturgeon, lots of washing of dirty laundry in public, a very acrimonious leadership campaign between Kate Forbes and Humza Yousaf. And Humza Yousaf only won by 52 to 48, so not really resounding. All of these questions being asked, and increasing doubts really about the future of the SNP at the moment. They've gone from being in an incredibly strong position to being seemingly in free fall within a matter of a few short weeks.
And maybe short of a few bob as well, allegedly. Catherine, thank you for that. In Westminster, of course, we'll get more as it emerges from Humza Yousaf, as we say, he's been speaking to reporters about this issue.
Now, the big question is, in my view, can we in the Scottish Heritage Party rise up as the David to face the Goliath of the Scottish political establishment? I believe that we can, but it needs you to come and join us. Look, the situation is so serious, so serious, that only a radical change will bring the solution. And that, I believe, is the Scottish Heritage Party. Over to the papers. And we begin with yesterday's National, the nationalist newspaper, of course, which says Scotland takes Tory bloc on gender reform to court. First Minister confirms that his government will fight Section 35. It's such a weak government. It doesn't stand a chance. And what I would say, look, wokery needs to come to an end in Scotland. Scotland to make debut at world's top drag pageant. I want to have global impact. I'm sorry that this is not the nation which was built on the word of God, which John Knox brought to our nation. We need to come back to firm foundations and remove ourselves with this global wokist cultural Marxism and be a nation proud again, an important nation, a nation that is seen all over the world to have firm foundations, not the crazy road we're on at this time, but a road of sanity rather than insanity. Coming to today's papers, today being the 14th of April, 2023, the Daily Telegraph in Scotland reads, in relation to the motorhome belonging to the SNP, I was in the dark, said Yousaf. I tell you this, the Scottish Heritage Party had £120,000 worth of motorhomes. Every member would know about it, but I can assure you we have not. Oh my, what a crazy, crazy Scotland we're living in. Only the Scottish Heritage Party, in my view, can put that right. Gender bill challenge could cost £500,000, declares the Scotsman newspaper. And there's a picture of Mary Quant. I remember her back from the 1960s. She brought in the miniskirt. Well, she's passed away aged 93, God bless her. Who am I to say anything much about her? I'm not a great expert, but all I would say is that she brought in a trendiness and fashion very distinctive in the 1960s. And then the Scotsman also reports another Calmac ferry out of service. That's the one to the island of Arran. Coming now to the Scottish Daily Express. Green SNP. I beg your pardon. I'm obsessed with the SNP. Green MSP, member of the Scottish Parliament, in bonkers plea on rapist gender ID. The Greens apparently are saying that the rapists, the male rapists over women, should be allowed to keep his gender and go to a woman's prison. How crazy is that? Then the Scottish Daily Mail, SNP gets wing clipped over foreign jollies. Now a jolly, you remember the, who was it? Only Fools and Horses, the Jolly Boys outing. It's become a wonderful expression for a jolly. Well, apparently that SNP members of Parliament have been using government funds to support, I haven't got it on my screen. Let me just see. The Scottish Daily Mail, you still got the green bonkers MSP. Now you've got it. SNP gets wing clipped over foreign jollies. Yes, the story goes that the SNP MSPs, that's what I'm saying, have been going to foreign countries so as to get support for their independence agenda using public funds. That seems to be the story on that one. If I can remember to move the paper on, you can then keep up with me. Nicky Campbell demands police action. This has been going on for some time over at Edinburgh Public School over a monster teacher, I believe to be a paedophile, causing great havoc in the day when Nicky Campbell was at that school. That's in the Daily Record. Then we come to the Metro. Farewell Ms. Miniskirt, a tribute there to Mary Quant. Then in the Scottish Eye, Families plead for disabled children to get access to their own savings. David Plunkett MP had brought this in the George Brown government, a savings scheme for disabled children, which they apparently no longer have access to these funds. Then the National of Today, the nationalist newspaper in Scotland, senior BBC journalist likes Can't Stand Yousaf tweet, and then in its pro-green agenda referring to oil slicks found in Scottish water. I remember going back to the 70s, the SNP shouting, "This is Scotland's oil." They now seem to have changed their tune, not wanting to use fossil fuel at all. And of course, this newspaper will not mention that the windmills in the sea causing major damage to marine life are unrecyclable because they have a biased point of view. We in this party will use our God-given fossil fuel responsibly and bring it right to the heart of the Scottish people with much cheaper energy bills, with natural gas from under the ground, from under the sea, from oil, and even look to open the oil fields again in a responsible manner using clean coal technology. The Scottish Sun runs on King's snub to Andy's ex. Forget it. Duchess not getting invite to the coronation. And there is Sarah Ferguson in relation to her apparent snub. We then move on to the Glasgow Times with a very serious story. I want to talk just a few minutes on this. Pervert kept images of babies stashed in Bible. He claimed he found book on a bus and never opened it. Well, it's not for me to get into the case, particularly if it is an open case. I can only talk in general. What Lindsay and I have found in Christian ministry over decades, there is a group of people who are, we call the self-righteous rather than God-righteous. There's a real holiness which can only be found in God, is our Christian perspective. But we have found people come in who look to suppress women, look to misquote the Bible, quote it out of context so they can control people. We call them the dangerous self-righteous rather than the holiness of God. You know, the Bible says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But with these people of self-righteousness, we have always found that they have sexual problems. Now, I don't talk about this particular case in the Glasgow Times. I know practically nothing about it, except the headline in the paper itself. Except in general terms, I can comment that what we have experienced in ministry is people who lord it over. Yeah, I feel so led to tell one story, and I could kick myself over this. We were running a church meeting in North Wales, and as a Christian minister, I like to be able to joke with young people in the congregation because I think young people like to have a laugh. I remember being young at one time. I remember wanting to have a laugh. I don't think they're any different today than them. But these young people just sat with stern faces in the congregation, and I was seriously disturbed. Now, they were being homeschooled, it would seem, in an isolated farmhouse in Cumbria. I still didn't cotton on. I could kick myself for not realizing. I couldn't understand why they weren't happy. You know, a Christian should be happy. You know, the Bible says the joy of the Lord is our strength. But they were suppressed down, and news came to me later that their father had been having sex with them. And I could have kicked myself. Why didn't I bring it out in the open? I say, Lord, forgive me. I should have heard you and brought it out in the open at the time. I just didn't cotton on. I just confessed my fault to you. But I've become much more alert to this. of self-righteous holiness. There has to be a joy in faith. There has to be a joy in life. And when I see young people without that joy, I get very, very concerned. We need to protect our young people. And if we go back to the Catholic priests in Ireland, in other faiths too, and other so-called Christian persuasions, we have seen so much of this. And it is like there is a use of faith to suppress people down. Now, I believe faith is about setting people free and having a liberty and freedom rather than a suppression. And as a Christian minister, I learned my lesson from the story I've told you now from some years ago. I trust now I have the discernment to spot when there is something going on. I think it is appalling, paedophilia. I think it's an absolute abuse of the highest level. And it's often done in the name of religion, as it would seem we're finding in this case in the Glasgow Times. And my heart goes out to any victims of this there might have been, because we need to put a stop to paedophilia once and for all. North residents unite to oppose giant power line. This is talking about the north of Scotland from the Press and Journal, that over beautiful scenery, they're looking to build a massive giant power line. And of course, that's coming from the Greens, in effect, the transfer of electricity over beautiful scenery. If it's not that, it's going to be their ugly windmills. I believe these things are causing more harm to the environment, because what the foundations of these power lines do, and also the foundations of these windmills do, wind power, is affect the soil, good farmland, putting lime into the soil, stopping crop growth. I believe the green agenda is anything but green, but something very different. I'm very disturbed about the headline in the Evening Telegraph coming out of Dundee of a bus journey from hell, in which a bus passenger drinking, strangely enough, Buckfast Abbey wine and being high on Valium was abusing people on the bus. Look, we need to be strong in the application of law in our nation. We need to put an end to drugs use once and for all. I believe a strong Heritage Party government will bring an end to widespread drug, what's the word I'm trying to look, so availability is the word I'm looking for. I believe we can do it with the support of the people, which is why we ask you to join the Scottish Heritage Party in Scotland and the Northern Ireland Heritage Party in Northern Ireland, obviously, and also the UK Heritage Party if you live in England and Wales. The Courier coming out of Dundee, owners dreaming of glory in Aintree. This is a group of people who bought a horse for £3,000, which is the national favourite. So we wish them from Scotland every success. Will they beat the Irish is the question. And then from Aberdeen, the Evening Express, the late final, no longer a pie in the sky idea. Now, Union Street, Aberdeen, I remember when I was a sales rep years ago, and my hands being freezing cold, holding my samples bag, going along Union Street, which is like a wind tunnel from the North Sea, blooming freezing in the Granite City. Well, apparently there's an idea for a cable car to take you from one end of Union Street to another. And it is a private firm looking to set this up. and I wish them every success to keep the people of Aberdeen warm in the winter or on windy days. And then the Daily Star of Scotland leads with the new pong-demic, the pong-demic, because people are not able to afford deodorants anymore, with deodorant prices going up to £5 a can. Horrendous. All part of what's going on after the last 2 to 3 years. Look, thank you for joining us. What have we covered today? Such an amazing programme. What can I say about the SNP government that's not already been said? The gender recognition bill sums it all up. The way they run their party, the way they run the country, with the ferries in big trouble, transport in big trouble, tourism in big trouble, lack of use of fossil fuel, outrageous to the economy. We need to have a government in Scotland of the people, for the people. I believe that government is the Scottish Heritage Party. Come and join us. We're few in number, but we're determined to win, as David knew he'd win against Goliath. So I know we're going to take hold of Holyrood, close it down, restore the county boundaries as they originally were, and give the power back to those counties so local people can run our country with representation in Westminster and the outrage of Holyrood brought to an end. Thank you for being with us on this programme, Scotland This Week. We'll see you again soon. God bless you.